Queen Elizabeth's 12-day visit to America starts today.
And D.C. is ready to welcome the Queen of England, who will arrive at the...
And official Washington is ready to roll out the red carpet for the Queen of England today. She's due to arrive at Andrews Air Force Base.
15 years after her last state visit to the U.S., the Queen began this tour at the White House with the 9th president of her reign. Welcomed by President Bush, saluted with gunfire. The sights and sounds of America's war of independence from Britain were on display. But today, said the president, in the sands and seas of the Persian Gulf lies the proof of ties never closer, of an alliance perhaps never stronger.
Years from now, men will speak of American and British heroism in the Gulf, as they do today of our cooperation in 2 world wars and 40 years of peacetime alliance.
It was mid-morning, and as the temperature climbed to 92 degrees, concentration lapsed, and the great podium incident unfolded. George Bush, 6'2", made no allowance for a queen somewhat smaller, and to the thousands watching, she became the hat of state. It didn't stop her teasing them.
It is 15 years since our last visit to Washington, when, with a gallant disregard for history, we shared wholeheartedly in the celebrations of the 200th anniversary of the founding of this great nation.
The slip-up behind them, they went on to a string of ceremonial duties, and then the president showed the Queen the pit he'd built near the Oval Office for throwing horseshoes. It's a pastime of this sporting president. He gave a demonstration. The Queen gave him plenty of room.
Very nice.
He missed. Soon, a more somber mood at Arlington National Cemetery, where at the tomb of the unknown soldier, the American dead of 2 world wars, of Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf, were remembered. Camera shutters greeted their evening arrival at the White House. The Queen, the guest of honor. For General Norman Schwarzkopf, a slight change of uniform.
Mr. President.
There were toasts to friendship and alliance, and another reminder from the president of the rebels who led America's revolution.
And I often wonder if I'd be standing here today if it weren't for a horse fancier named Paul Revere.
Day 1, drawn to a close by Jesse Norman. Day 2 began in northeast Washington, where drugs and murders are common, but where one youth club run by the police gives youngsters a haven. Their martial arts were a big hit.
I see it.
Nearby, a warm welcome. The district's children had rehearsed for days. Don't push, don't touch, don't get too excited. Alice Fraser was excited. She'd also been to a rehearsal on what was proper when the Queen came to visit. She forgot everything and did what she'd been hoping to do for weeks. After the hug, she insisted on introducing her whole family and telling her visitor that she already lived with a queen, Laverne Queen, her granddaughter. No one quite knew how to take her. Try to leave her and she wouldn't have it. She needed photos for the family. In the end, sadly, no, the Queen couldn't stay for the fried chicken and iced tea Alice had made. Never mind, it had all been worth it.
I will sit down and talk to my grandchildren, you know, and tell them I met the Queen.
Lunch came at a celebration of British film and television. But after Alice, perhaps everything was an anticlimax. And it was hot. Very hot. Outside, at the garden party in the grounds of the British Embassy, it wasn't just hot, it was crowded and hot.
Could you step back? I'm sorry, but we kind of have to ask you to move.
1,800 people at one of the social events of Washington's year.
All right, look us up. Back up again now.
Most of them straining for just one glimpse.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, the Orioles are tonight playing host to some very, very special guests who have come a long, long way to see their first baseball game.
It's Wednesday night, and former university baseball team captain George Bush takes his guests to see the Baltimore Orioles. In fact, to meet them in their dugout.
Right now, there she is.
But how to greet the Queen? When one of the legends of baseball, Babe Ruth, met the Queen's father, King George VI, he kept it simple and said, "Hiya, King."
Number 12, Mike Devereaux.
There was ball-by-ball advice from the president. From her position in the box, the Queen could also see protesters in the stands.
I doubt not of his temperance.
Very well.
The next morning, the entertainment changed to the Folger Shakespeare Theatre and King Lear's reconciliation with his daughter Cordelia.
I fear I am not in my perfect mind. Methinks I should know you. And all the skill I have remembers not these garments, nor I know not where I did lodge last night. Do not laugh at me, for as I am a man, I think this lady to be my child, Cordelia.
And so I am. I am.
Then the turn of the children. At school, for weeks, they'd been rehearsing the taming of the shrew.
He's been saying, okay, I want you for my wife, and she's like, right.
The key moment, every child actor's nightmare, the kiss.
He was saying, don't bend until she comes to you.
Time and again, they tried to get closer.
Okay, but you guys are gonna have to be close for it to work, otherwise we go...
Time and again, they just couldn't. But with a royal audience, you've just got to roll your sleeves up and get on with it. On Capitol Hill, they were preparing for one of the highlights of the visit, the Queen's address to a joint session of Congress, the first by any British monarch.
Mr. Speaker, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh.
Both houses of Congress are controlled by the Democratic Party. She began playing to the gallery by reminding members of her arrival at the Republican-controlled White House, when protocol failed and the podium kept her hidden.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
In a speech of thanks for a century of alliance, the Queen pointed to the common bedrock of Britain and the US, democracy.
Some people believe that power grows from the barrel of a gun. So it can, but history shows that he never grows well, nor for very long. Force in the end is sterile.
She praised the president and America's troops for helping reverse the invasion of Kuwait. But there was a sting to this speech.
Unfortunately, experience shows that great enterprises seldom end with a tidy and satisfactory flourish.
Iraqi Kurds and Shiites are still suffering, she said. Britain and the US are doing their best to achieve lasting peace.
If we succeed, our military success will have achieved its true objective.
Her address ended with a pledge of friendship.
You will find us worthy partners, and we are proud to have you as our friends. May God bless America.
A torrential downpour marked the Queen's arrival in Miami. In the grounds of an ornate mansion, Florida's finest were drenched. Undeterred, the children had been practicing their curtsy for hours. Their big moment came and was gone in the sweep of a wet entourage. Other techniques fared no better. Technique is something the Tornado Marching Band is still working on, but at least they had the weather. The students, 1/3 of them born in Cuba, couldn't stay still, and they wanted the Queen to do the same.
Everybody dance now.
The notes were sharper that night as the guests arrived at the quayside in Miami for a dinner on board the Royal Yacht Britannia. 2 former presidents joined the Queen and 2 former First Ladies. After dinner, the Queen came on deck to hear the traditional quayside farewell from the band of the Royal Marines, Beat Retreat. With the flag of the Royal Yacht in place, Britannia slipped anchor and moved out into the bay. It was a balmy Friday evening, and ahead lay a weekend of relaxation, cruising among the Florida Keys. The Keys are a collection of small islands off Florida, hundreds in all, Key Largo and Key West the most famous. Centuries ago, other Britons came here, planting the pineapple, tamarind and lime trees that once made these islands rich. Today, tourism is their lifeline, and it was to one tiny island 68 miles off the coast that the royal party came to see Fort Jefferson. At every stop on the tour, a gift, this seashell to be added to a collection on the royal yacht. The Queen and Prince Philip were certainly dressed for a tropical weekend. Their escorts, the US Rangers, who now man this national monument. Fort Jefferson was built in the last century as a key coastal defense, but its 140 guns never saw battle. After the American Civil War, it became a prison, housing 4 of the men who conspired to murder President Lincoln. Today, it's the site not of troops or prisoners, but of tourists and wildlife. The rest of the weekend was spent away from the cameras, with time to meander among the islands, picnic on the beach, and swim in the warm seas. Calm before the storm. Florida is also home to the warplanes and the troops of U.S. Central Command. From MacDill Air Force Base, the American military directs the movements of its soldiers across 3 continents and 18 countries, including the Middle East. From here, F-16 warplanes took off for the Gulf and for Iraq, and with them went a man who would soon become a household name, the man the Queen had come to see. General H. Norman Schwarzkopf was waiting to become America's 13th honorary knight, though there wasn't much room left on his uniform for any more honors.
Are you nervous?
No.
Not at all.
No.
But Stormin' Norman had been hoping for a more clement welcome.
I would like to introduce you myself.
First stop, the war room that was the hub of Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm.
This really is, in fact, where most of the initial planning and the deployment of our forces took place.
The Queen was shown a film never released to the public of some of the combat of the Gulf War. It was afterwards in private that she made the general a Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath. There was no sword, the general didn't kneel. He emerged with the honor he'd been handed and a citation that read, "For outstanding leadership of Allied coalition forces." The star and badge doesn't mean he can call himself Sir, but everyone here calls him that anyway. A flypast of F-16s was followed by a tour of the base. The new knight's first act of chivalry to steady the Queen's umbrella. Not quite the weather for an open top, but the two of them seemed oblivious to the rain. As the general bade farewell to the Queen, the media was anxious to hear his thoughts, one admirer to find out who he was.
Did we see you on TV?
Yeah, every now and then. All I really thought about was the magnificent British forces that were under my command and what great supporters they were. From the day they walked in the door, Sir Peter de la Ville walked in the door, the absolute total 100% cooperation, and they're true friends. They're very, very dear friends of ours.
Texas, the Lone Star State, home of the cowboy and home deep in its heart of the Alamo. It's a symbol of Texan independence, for it was here that 189 men held their ground for a dozen days against a Mexican army of 4,000. Among them, the famous frontiersmen Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie. There were 12 Englishmen, 12 Irishmen, 4 Scotsmen and a Welshman. It was here that the Queen began her days in Texas. Among the exhibits, Davy Crockett's rifle. Like the other guns that held the Alamo, it fell silent on the 13th day when all 189 men were killed. The battle cry, "Remember the Alamo," inspired Texans to win their independence 6 weeks later. A new country, recognized by the Queen's great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. Today's Texans rather like the Queen.
She looked right at me. She looked right at me, right straight at me, and I curtsied.
I want to go home with her.
She's a senior citizen like we are, and I hope she's holding up well.
She just epitomizes so much in elegance. She's a grand lady.
Texans may be part of North America, but the culture of the southern continent is in their blood. And in San Antonio, in the music and on the river, you can feel it. Texas today is battling with another frontier, space. At NASA's Mission Control in Houston, the Queen saw the nerve center of 30 years of space exploration. Mementos of early flights, lunar landings and space shuttles abound. The Queen was guided by one of the new generation of astronauts, an Englishman, Michael Fole from Cambridge.
We are honored to welcome you to the Johnson Space Center, Your Majesty and Your Royal Highness. Thank you for visiting.
Houston builds well-mannered robots. Their goodbyes friendly but a little stiff. It was in Houston, America's fourth largest city, that the Queen's official tour of the US came to an end. But what an end. At Antioch Baptist Church, a service of Negro spirituals. For the head of the Church of England, it was certainly a change from Westminster Abbey. Her companion, the Mayor of Houston, clearly savouring the singing.
He would begin to play every one of our youths. Oh, yes, he will.
The toes of Prince Philip and the Queen were tapping discreetly. Others were less restrained. It was a rousing climax to a 10-day tour that had sprung a few surprises, but held a lot to look back on.
There is a symbolism in the events of such a visit that defies analysis, but which has a way of reaching the hearts of people far and wide.
A huge portrait of Mao Zedong broods in Peking's Tiananmen Square, where his people still pay homage at his mausoleum, though they have discarded most of his teaching, spurned many of his ideas. In his day, it would have been unthinkable that his people would rush for a glimpse of a British Queen. Not that they were successful. At the last minute, the Politburo decreed that the Queen's arrival would be a closed affair, giving security as a somewhat spurious reason, and defying the Queen's wish that the people should see her and she should see the people. China hasn't changed that much. So it came about that only a few favoured party officials and a lot of press were permitted to witness this piece of history. Then, for the first time, a British sovereign stood to attention on Chinese soil for the Chinese national anthem. A goose-stepping guard commander sounded most aggressive. He was actually offering, in the nicest possible way, to show her his guard of honor. Quite a guard, too, each man exactly the same height, a sort of recruiting by tape measure. At the end of the line, President Lee prepared to greet the party faithful. The Queen smiled, probably realizing that even here politicians never miss a chance of milking the limelight. Then the primary school children took over with a song whose refrain said, "You're welcome, most warmly welcome," but sounded more fun than that. For the Queen, the children took the edge off the austere feeling of the ceremony. She began to relax a little, let the tensions ease. The march past of that all-the-same height Guard of Honor was a spectacularly disciplined affair. This may be one of the best that has ever paraded before her. Of course, for the ordinary people at Peking, the day had started hours earlier. They rise with the sun when they can see it through the city's heavy pollution, and when they rise, they exercise. Even opera singers prefer a quiet park to practice in. The bicycle is still the nicest way of going to work and the most popular, though the Western gift of traffic jams is literally just around the corner. Still, even that could be better than rush hour buses in China. It's the bike carts that bring the vegetables and fruit into the city every morning. Excellent produce and a good example of the newly permitted free enterprise allowed here these days. The farmer and the market people get to keep what they make on the produce. The result so far is that the quality is better. There's much more variety about, and that finds ready buyers because there's much more money about too. Consumer goods are suddenly everywhere, so that people can get what they call the big pieces: television, radio, sewing machine, fridge. There are hairdressers attempting Western styles to the sound of 60s music. But when it comes to leisure, it's the older pleasures that survive, like kite flying, which for 2,000 years the Chinese have used as an expression of their freedom. On toddlers' outings to the zoo, they still use the wise old method whereby no one gets lost. And when a child waves, the panda winks back. But in Peking, where everyone works 6 days a week, the day-off delight is boating. The Duke of Edinburgh, rather indiscreetly, said Peking was boring. Certainly it's a grey old place with uninspiring high-rise buildings made sooty by coal-fired industry and producing smog like London used to have. But at its heart lies a gem, the Forbidden City, the imperial palaces of the Ming dynasty covering 250 acres of the centre of Peking. In the days of the emperors, it was an offence punishable by death to enter the gates. There was also an imperial law that no building in the city could be higher than the Taihedian, the Hall of Supreme Harmony. These days, you can be an empress for 5 minutes to impress the neighbours, and your husband, when he takes his baseball cap off, can be an emperor. Quite an upmarket snap for £1. For the real thing, known here in translation as the foreign female king, there was rather more protocol, and an entourage that flowed behind her like a river in flood. On this tide, she was swept into the Hall of Supreme Harmony, a rare occasion for the old building since the People's Republic to have a monarch in its own throne room. It's an impressive place, though a bit chilling, and maybe there's still a whiff of autocracy in the air. It's also a little fraying at the edges, particularly the great dragon throne itself, which looks a bit like an old stage set abandoned by a touring company of Chu Chin Chow. That same interpreter, she of the limitless words, explained it all. Everyone dutifully looked, then craned their necks to take in the superb wooden ceiling. The ceilings are a feature of all the 9,999 buildings in the Forbidden City, 9 being an auspicious number for the emperors of the Ming dynasty. It takes about an hour to walk in a straight line through all the gates and halls of this ornate acreage. And like many a tourist before her, the Queen discovered it's not easy on the feet. But worth it to see things like the carved staircase, which falls like a waterfall of stone from Great Hall to courtyard. In some ways, the little lanes of the city are more interesting than the showpieces, but they didn't show her much of those. Still, she did get to walk through the Emperor's Garden, which is calm and quiet and not all that ornate. The authorities had allowed a few ordinary people to stand and stare politely, which pleased the Queen, though she was not to know how unusual that was to be on this trip. After an hour, the motorcade took her back towards the reality of Peking. The Forbidden City, in its incomparable way, reverted to entertaining the tourists. That evening, in tiara, diamonds, rubies, the full fig, the Queen climbed the staircase of the Great Hall of the People. You could almost hear rumblings from the old chairman's mausoleum across the square. And once again, a British sovereign was making history. President Lee looked a little nonplussed at this unusual guest. But he'd gone to a lot of trouble with the banquet. Very pretty table decorations and place settings, which included knife and fork as well as chopsticks. There was an item on the menu called Buddha jumping over the wall. It turned out to mean sea slugs. The Chinese may be poetic about their menus, but their real concern is to eat as often and as much as possible. They're a nation of compulsive eaters. That's why the street stalls do a roaring trade throughout the day. A bowl of dim sum between meals keeps the pangs away. Everywhere there are food markets, and when they're not buying or eating, they're gazing at it. In the south, the Cantonese boast they will eat anything, including lizards. They buy live fish on a string. Small tortoises which provide little steaks. And I'm afraid, kittens. It has to be said the people of the north think the Cantonese are barbarians. Snakes have speciality restaurants all of their own, and snakes include cobras. At the best places, they skin them at your table. You can get a snake platter with a dozen different recipes. And the ultimate delicacy is a glass of the bile. Just snip, pour, and drink. Peking ducks start life like any other ducks, except that they're treated with much more kindness. Pampered, really. An idyllic life that lasts 40 days and 40 nights. Once dead, they're pumped full of air. The sugar syrup is generously ladled on, and they're roasted over wood. They're carved and eaten with enormous solemnity. For the Chinese, food is the most serious thing in life. And you can't start too early. Now the political round must begin. The Queen met all the senior Chinese leaders, and a lot of time was set aside for each meeting, duly photographed by both sides. The main meeting was with Mr. Deng Xiaoping, the ultimate leader of today's China. He's a veteran of many purges, a party survivor who took part in the Long March which forged the revolution.
Well, you know, I'm the old man. 你是很活跃的呀。
Mr. Deng doesn't even have a title, yet he's the undisputed boss. Now 82, he's the man responsible for China's new open-door policy. And he likes a joke, too.
When I was in Paris, I was told that when the weather was very fine, when you were standing on the Eiffel tower, you can see Britain, part of Britain. Is it true?
I think that would be rather difficult. It's quite a long way.
我觉得在埃菲尔铁塔上头看英国啊是很困难的，因为中间的距离还是很遥远的。
A major idea of Deng's is that the best education should be for those who will best benefit from it, like these children in a Peking kindergarten. They're deliberately chosen from the ranks of one-child families. Parents having only one child get tax concessions too, and the descendants of revolutionary pioneers. Pure elitism, in other words. Mind you, being elite can be a bit of a strain. Unlike the regimented welcome she was to experience later, these children had a degree of spontaneity. The children staged a song and dance show for the Queen. The Duke, who arrived late from work elsewhere, was in time for the finale. The children, rather formally, said, "May you and your family reign happily for many years." Not an entirely revolutionary sentiment. And so to the unique experience, a walk on the Great Wall of China. The village of bustling, 50 miles north of Peking, is where the wall has been restored and made accessible. Even so, it's not for the faint-hearted. Neither are the souvenir shops, whose owners have interpreted free enterprise as the open wallet policy. Very successful too. Tourists are everywhere, and the Chinese, suddenly with money and freedom, turn out to be naturals. The Queen turned out to be another natural, making light of the climb. She walked 3 times as far as the planners had allowed for and wasn't at the least bit puffed at the end. Of course, the sensible shoes helped, and a desire to make the most of the occasion despite having that absurdly overblown entourage in tow. This extraordinary bulwark has been here for over 2,000 years. It was built 200 years before the birth of Christ. It was the idea of the Emperor Qi Yin, the first emperor who unified China behind this barricade. Now it is the only man-made object that can be seen from outer space. So up past the awesome massed ranks of photographers she went, ever upwards towards the high towers. Indeed, she was game for 2 more towers yet. If she'd kept at it, she would arrive in Mongolia. If she'd turned left at the start, she could walk all the way to the Gobi Desert. The point about the wall is that it worked. It kept out the Hun and then the Mongol. Only now has it surrendered to the photographers. In fact, the Queen's Leica would have had more work to do had it not been for that interpreter again, embarking on one of her word marathons. She's clearly the sort of lady who swallows guidebooks for breakfast. It took 140 years for the Ming emperors to join up the wall to its full length. It was wide enough to take 10 infantrymen marching abreast, or 5 horsemen. This section at Badaling is 25 feet high, a daunting prospect for your Hun or your Mongol. By now, the Queen was almost at the end of her chosen distance. She looked over the ramparts. Even now, it looks fairly hostile out there. This is what they used to call the land beyond the wall, enemy land, and so behind the wall, China was created. Then, with an attendant fussing unnecessarily and distractingly, the Queen discovered the tourist truism: coming down is harder than going up. She trod the old stones very warily, using the handrail. At the end, she was thoughtful, as most of us are, confronted by the grandeur, the scale, the beautiful defiance of the Great Wall of China. Shanghai is like no other city in China, an odd blend of Asia and Merseyside, with more sophistication than either, and a marvelous waterfront. That it ever became more than a fishing village on the Huangpe River is entirely due to British colonialism. In the mid-19th century, we imported opium from India despite the emperor's objections. When trade became difficult, we sent in the gunboats, and that's how we won concession land in Shanghai and the island of Hong Kong. Indeed, there's still a small whiff of the colonial atmosphere, overlaid with the excitement of a bright, clever people who believe they're the best in China and are not slow to tell you. Certainly the shops are the best in China, with luxury blatantly on display. though they still use the abacus to tot up the bill, calculators or no calculators. This is now a boom town and enjoying every moment of it. At the airport, the children rehearse the performance they give for every visiting head of state. The band came willingly, except perhaps for just William here. At last, they were all in line, poised to begin the show, as the Queen's TriStar moved through the morning heat haze to the exact inch of its allotted position. Today, thoughts of Britain's role in the colonial past were put aside, though that part of history is taught in the schools these welcoming children attend. The children, anyhow, were now into their well-drilled act. But not everyone was happy. The men of the PSB, the Public Security Bureau, were being thoroughly unpleasant to the British photographers. Mr. Michael Shea, the Queen's press secretary, intervened.
They've not had one good picture yet. Come on, take it along as well. Come this way. Yes, they have hardly had a decent picture. Because of all the security people, they've hardly had a decent picture. You must get a grip of this. These security people all over the place.
The Queen, oblivious of this, was having her first ride in a Chinese Red Star limousine. Following up was the British Consul General's car, a London taxi. In the old city of Shanghai is the Wuxinting Tea House, said to serve the best brew in town, and reached by the Bridge of 9 Zigzags. It does a roaring trade in the afternoons. The ground floor is the takeaway department. To reach the tea house, the Queen strolled through the old alleys. It seemed peaceful enough, or as peaceful as it can be with this sort of following. But that row with the PSB men was flaring again, this time involving our man from the embassy. He was trying to keep the photographer's line of sight clear. The Queen tried, not very successfully, to look in the shops. 50 years ago, you would have had your throat cut in these alleys. Now there was more security than you could shake a stick at. Mr. Shea rightly got upset about this again. His intervention developed into a furious row involving a senior PSB man. The row continued round the corner as the Queen got closer and closer. She spotted what was going on and decided to leave well alone. At last, the tea house was in sight, much to both sides' relief. The people of Shanghai struggled cheerfully against the rope and the police. But at least they got a wave as the Queen trod across the 9 zigzags. She sat thoughtfully over her tea. Sir Geoffrey Howe decided he'd earned himself an indulgence of cakes. The trouble was that every time she took a sip, the waitress topped up the cup. There was a flourish of penny whistle Percy Grainger. And so ended afternoon tea. The Royal Yacht Britannia was lit from stem to stern as she lay at anchor in the Huangpu River. And the city answered her by illuminating its buildings along the waterfront. President Lee went on board for a banquet the Queen gave in his honor. Shanghai's elite trooped behind. Now, President Lee is not used to being ordered about, so the photo call produced something of a shock. First, his wife told him to put his glasses straight, and then...
And smile.
As always on these occasions, the Queen took her guests on deck to watch Britannia's Royal Marine Band beat retreat on the quayside. The lights on the dock were put out, and on they marched. So now it was time to say goodbye to Shanghai. Near Xi'an in Shanxi province in central China lies the burial tomb of the Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the man who started the Great Wall. It's in this artificial hill and is sealed awaiting excavation. But people still go to climb it to pay their respects to the man who unified China and acknowledge a remarkable imagination. For beneath this hangar, a mile from the tomb, is the Emperor's gift to posterity, the masterpiece of the terracotta soldiers. To give the Queen a foretaste of the soldiers, they put live representations on the steps and set them swaying, a mesmerizing, eerie movement. The simple magic worked. The Queen was instantly entranced by these weird people. But all that swaying is hard work, so afterwards it was off masks and have a rest, and a cigarette. But where did I put the matches in this rig-out? The Queen was allowed down into the pit to walk among the terracotta men, a privilege not always accorded to visitors. The accident of two peasants digging a well on this spot revealed what is probably the greatest archaeological discovery of this century. That was in 1974. Suddenly a whole buried army, 2,000 years old, had come to light. There are 6,000 figures here, most of them almost as sound as when they were frozen in time. It was the Emperor Qi-in's idea to have his tomb guarded by a complete pottery army. Each man is different in facial expression, different in moustache, in hairstyle. These are the infantry regiments on the march. Originally, the figures were multicolored, but an underground fire burned off the color. The Duke found a piece of charcoal from that fire so long ago. And dutifully, he put it back. There are, unbelievably, two more pits like this, thought to contain a further 2,000 soldiers. The excavation work will last well into the next century. The models for the faces were taken from real people all over China, including members of the Emperor's Guard. The bodies are hollow, the limbs and heads are solid, all individually sculpted. At the end, the Queen stood on the very edge of the pit in silence, looking down on the work still to do and the extraordinary scale of this ancient army, the terracotta soldiers. Around Kunming in Yunnan province, near the border with Burma and Vietnam, the land is rich and rewarding. This is the rural China the Queen had so little time to see. Of the 2 rice crops a year, this season's has been a very good one. Good enough for the women of the village to smile, resembling for a moment those stylized posters of happy communist workers achieving their norms. This is only a small village, but it has a mainish sort of road running through it, fortunately, as it turns out. The old lady hit on the idea of spreading low-grade rice on the road itself. The trucks roll over it, and she collects her harvest. It's really a brainy village. With an electric fan, it's easy to separate the grain from the chaff. Lake Dianxi, just outside Kunming, is one of the treasures of the city they call, when it's not actually pouring, the land of eternal spring. And rising from the lake are the western hills, where on the highest ground there are some Buddhist temples. It's quite a trudge to see them.
This is a Taoist.
But it is worth it for the view. And for the mid-morning tea. The point about these temples is that they are now being used for worship again under the new freedom for religion. The Cultural Revolution didn't stamp out religion, it simply went underground. Now the monks can pray again. They banged the temple bells and drums for the Queen. She seemed fascinated by the statues. And they seemed ferociously interested in her. In this border province, there are 24 different national minorities, each with their own language and culture quite different from the Chinese. Here, for example, British teachers have Mongolian and Tibetan pupils in their English classes. The names of these nationalities at their own university here make a catalogue of strangeness. The Yi people, the Bai, the Hani, the Aini, the Zhuang, the Miao, the Wa, and the Chinpo. With all this ethnic culture around, there had to be a performance, started off by the Thai people. The Chinese had the good idea of giving the Queen lunch on an island on Lake Bianchi. A rather swish riverboat with potted palms at the bow set off decorously across the lake. What happened then was that the Queen and the Duke had the perfect opportunity to see those famous old Chinese paintings come to life. Canton's Children's Palace is the playground of China's gifted children. This is certainly elitism again, and means the near guarantee of a special career. But when it comes to a performance for the Queen, it seems even more care has to be taken. And in China, makeup is an art in itself. But before the performance proper, a surprise spectacular, if militaristic, display on the children's boating lake. And a further surprise. In the art class, which was of a very high standard, there was a familiar portrait. Though done by a boy quite unfamiliar with the subject. Arriving for the performance, the children swarmed to the Queen. On this last day, something which hadn't been rehearsed. It was quickly back to discipline, though. And that should have been an appropriate last word. But this is China, and before Britannia sailed, the Cantonese were in united agreement about the farewell. Let there be dragons. And so a visit for the history books was over. The first to China by a reigning British sovereign. The first chance for the Chinese to set eyes on a constitutional monarch, a concept they find difficult to grasp. Perhaps both sides have learned something about each other. After all, this is what these visits are supposed to be about.
From the mists of time, Singapore, a small island surrounded by islets, has had a singular passion for trade. Today, its Manhattan skyline is a dazzling advertisement for a high-tech economy, with banks and hotels that rival the biggest and the tallest in the world. The island's symbol, the merlion, gave Singapore its name, Lion City. Today, it proclaims the island's preeminence among the developing economies of Southeast Asia, with a standard of living second only to Japan's. The first settlers here, Chinese traders in pirate junks and Tamil seamen from India, came through the waters of Singapore in search of rice and spices. They left their mark. The Chinese, 76% of the population, call themselves Singaporeans, but their culture dies hard. Indians and Malays make up the other elements in this sometimes feuding cosmopolitan mix. The Queen knew from previous visits here that the influence of the British has been profound. Stamford Raffles, an East India Company official, landed here in 1819 to establish the British presence. Today, cricket still played on the village green. The clock still stands at 10 to 3, and is there honey still for tea? It was no surprise that the Queen was given an entirely British welcome. A less formal welcome awaited the Queen at the Townsville Primary School. The lion, that recurring symbol in Singapore life, began the first of many traditional dance displays the Queen was to see. This one performed somewhat self-consciously by the 10-year-old pupils of the school's dance club. Symbols announced Her Majesty's arrival and heralded a dance rooted in Chinese folklore and based on the story of Madam's Snake. The 1,900 pupils, many who'd never heard of the Queen before this visit, gave her a welcome equal to any she's received. On a visit to the Ang Mo Kio shopping centre, the Queen's party was overwhelmed by the crowds pressing forward to see her and by photographers. When she emerged from the crowd, the Queen appeared completely unconcerned. It's difficult to imagine any other leading head of state being allowed so close to uncontrolled crowds on a foreign tour. The Queen was then driven to Chinatown. The continued existence of this area is controversial. Singapore's obsession with the images of modern success once led the government to think of tearing it down. But parts of Chinatown survive, in uneasy juxtaposition to the embrace of the newer Singapore. This combination of old and new, the mix of East and West, is one of the fascinations of this society. At the British Council, the Queen watched a demonstration of the 1986 Doomsday Project. Using a computer, an inquirer gets an insight into places where ordinary Britons of the 80s live and work. With the Queen's visit, the computer sought a reference to Balmoral.
You see that the last sentence is, I'm fortunate to live on Balmoral Estate because my parents work at the house.
Oh, right, yes.
And that makes the point. Do you know who that would be?
The computer also calls up maps and pictures of places. Did the Queen wish to try?
Gordon Street, I suppose.
Where is that near?
Yeah, Elgin.
Elgin. Right. So that's a place. Or
Elgin's a place.
Right, how do you spell it?
E-L-G-I-N.
Elgin.
Yeah.
We should be able to find a photograph of this as well, somewhere in the region.
Yeah.
I can recognise it.
That's very successful.
At the United World College, the Duke of Edinburgh spoke about the importance of the world's wildlife and about striking a balance between preserving wildlife and current environmental concerns like the ozone layer.
Well, that's quite separate from all of you, and not only you, but an awful lot of people who are worrying about the ozone layer and the CO2 layer and global warming and God knows all these ghastly things that are happening all right. Those are going to affect us, there's no question about that. But somehow or other, somebody's got to look after the rest of the life on this planet, which after all, we are part of the life on this planet. We cannot exist without the rest of it.
Can we have 3 cheers for the Duke of Edinburgh? Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray! Thank you. I was dreading you'd say that. What about a half holiday to mark the occasion, he said.
Pipers announced Her Majesty's arrival for a state banquet at the presidential palace, the Istana. Lee Kuan Yew, on the Queen's right, has been Prime Minister since 1965. He's seen by some of his countrymen as a vindictive autocrat who hates criticism and who stifles freedom of speech. But the Queen praised what he's done for Singapore.
He has, over many years, proved to be one of the Commonwealth's sturdiest sheet anchors, prudent in counsel and wise in judgment. Without you, Prime Minister, Singapore would undoubtedly be a very different place today. You can be justifiably proud as you lead your country into its Silver Jubilee year.
The Queen's visit to the Kranji War Cemetery recalled as no other event Britain's role in Singapore's history. Topped by the Cross of Sacrifice, it's a memorial to the men who died when the Japanese invaded the then British colony of Singapore. Churchill called it the worst disaster and the largest capitulation in British history. For the people of Singapore, it's a bitter memory, the pain of which remains as sharp as ever after more than 40 years. The cemetery sits on a bluff which overlooks the straits where the Japanese landed in February 1942. The invasion took its toll. The occupation was much worse. Many of those remembered here died in the unspeakable horrors of the construction of the rail link between Thailand and Burma. Of one party of 7,000 sent from Singapore to Thailand in April 1943, 25% were dead by that August of starvation, heat, disease, and sheer brutality. the Queen came here to honor the doomed youth of a generation and to remember the 24,000 people who died in 3 terrible years. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, the shrill demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires. On the final evening in Singapore, Britannia, docked in Singapore harbour, was the setting for a banquet given by the Queen. Her Majesty was repaying the hospitality she'd been given by President Wee and his wife at the Presidential Palace. After dinner, the Queen led the President and her guests, government ministers, politicians, and other prominent people in Singapore life, out of the state dining room, along the corridors, and onto the deck of Britannia for beating the retreat. The Queen's farewell to Singapore and the start of a gentle 2-day cruise up the Malacca Straits. By early dawn 2 days later, Britannia and her escort were hugging the Malaysian coast, preparing to dock at Port Klang. By 10 that morning, a clamour of Malay drums greeted the royal visitors as they stepped off Britannia. Malaysia is a federation of 13 states, and Her Majesty's host here was the Crown Prince of Selangor. It's part of the traditional welcome here to throw rice, to invoke the spirits of prosperity and joy. In Malaysia, the Queen stayed at the Carcosa, a building with a checkered history. It was a British house, then Malaysian, given back to the British on Malaysia's independence before being reclaimed by the present Malaysian government. Destined soon to be an expensive guest house, its luxuriant gardens have a commanding view of the capital, Kuala Lumpur. The city's architectural mix is a near-perfect sketch of Malaysia's history, dominated by Arabs, Indians and Chinese before its European phase. The central market reflects a thriving sector of the economy, where enterprise is as keen now as it was when the Indians and the Malays fought the Chinese and the Portuguese for the spice trade monopoly. The Queen's formal welcome to Malaysia took place in Parliament Square. Malaysia has a rotating monarchy. Every 5 years, one of the country's 9 sultans is elected king to reign under yellow umbrellas. They're also used to honor visiting royalty. The lavish courts of the sultans and the kings became justly known for their etiquette. Before a state dinner given by the present Malaysian king, there was an elaborate exchange of gifts. Of the many, a gold-topped walking stick for the Duke, and a carriage clock from the Queen, suitably engraved to Malaysia's Queen. The sultans of Malaysia acquired their status and power in the 15th century. That began to diminish in the next 300 years. But as the state dinner for the Queen showed, these courts have retained a great deal of the essence of their elegance, glitter, and style. If Malaysia has one single sound, it is the Muslim call to prayer. From the time it was brought here by Muslim traders 500 years ago, Islam has permeated Malaysian life. The Abdul Aziz Shah Mosque is a fitting symbol to the religion's prominence. It's the largest in Southeast Asia. It's made some concessions to modern comfort, but the invitation to Her Majesty specified that she'll not be allowed to set foot on the carpet in the main prayer hall. No woman's allowed to do that. The Queen had to wear a cloak specially made for her for the occasion. With the Duke of Edinburgh, she was shown round by the architect. Local photographers then scrambled over the Queen's red carpet, and an undignified scrum developed as security appeared to break down. The Queen made her exit from the mosque through an unplanned route. Order restored, the Queen returned the cloak, but kept the slippers. The Duke of Edinburgh stood in for the Queen on a visit to the Selangor Cheshire home, part of a foundation of which Her Majesty is patron. The Queen was unwell. The Duke made her apologies.
Well, the Queen apologises for not being able to come. But I'll take it back and give it to her.
If the residents were disappointed in not seeing the Queen, they didn't let it show. By mid-afternoon, the Queen felt well enough to carry out her next engagement at the Selangor Turf Club. She'd come to present the Commonwealth Cup for a race to be run over a mile. There aren't a great many opportunities for off-course betting in this country, so in their thousands, punters come to the track and crowd the betting booths under the stands. The Queen spent some time looking at the horses in the paddock, and much longer trying to read the form and make some assessment of the state of the going. At one point, she moved over to the Duke of Edinburgh to give him the benefit of what she'd worked out. The Duke was non-committal, leaving the Queen slightly perplexed that he'd not taken her advice. But the Queen Elizabeth II once only handicap race was run, and the £60,000 prize was won. A quick and slightly disorganized rearrangement of the red carpet had to be carried out before the presentation was made to the winning jockey. Next morning, Britannia sailed into the home port of the Malaysian Navy, Lemut, bringing the Queen on a short visit to the state of Perak and to the town of Ipoh. It's difficult to know what the Queen made of this rather gentle dance routine. But she certainly seemed to enjoy the more robust Silat, the Malay martial art equivalent of Chinese Kung Fu. By the time the Queen's motorcade roared to its next stop, the weather had changed in this season of monsoons, and the children waiting at Ipoh Airport were caught in a thunderous downpour. But it didn't last, and by the time the royal party arrived, the sun had broken through the clouds again.
The President of Gambia and Lady Jawara.
At the end of her state visit, the Queen reboarded Britannia to meet individually and at dinner the 49 Commonwealth heads of government meeting here in Malaysia. She greeted the outgoing Secretary-General Sonny Ramphal, and the Queen was delighted to welcome Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan's return to the Commonwealth. The Queen reminded her guests that when they last met for dinner on Britannia in Nassau 4 years ago, they'd lost their way at sea and were late.
Unlike the last occasion on which we gathered for dinner in Britannia, I'm delighted to see you all here on time and in good order. It is essentially a family gathering. Like all the best families, we have our share of eccentricities, of impetuous and wayward youngsters, and of family disagreements. But we also have our wise uncles and aunts, and the solid, dependable family members on whom everyone relies.
This is the Queen's 21st visit to Commonwealth conferences, and to mark it, there was a cake.
I shall cut it, because it's too much like hardware to blow up.
The Queen had begun her visit to Southeast Asia with persistent echoes of Britain's colonial past. It ended with an extraordinary image of the new Commonwealth partnership.